Welcome to episode 40 of Anchored in Education. I'm E. Scott England, and Anchored in Education is the podcast dedicated to all things education. Educators across the world routinely engage in conversations surrounding fundamentals, concepts, and new ideas that improve this great profession. Sometimes we agree, other times we disagree. But at the end of the day, we are all anchored in education. I suppose I will begin today's episode with a shout out because you know I love those, but this shout out goes to Illinois State University. No, I'm not an alumnus, but I'm married to one, and it's because of her that we receive Illinois State, the institution's quarterly journal keeping alumni up to date on the happenings surrounding the university. The first issue of the 20th volume arrived to our house in August. It boasted the title, Help Wanted, Working to Solve a Teacher Shortage. The journal's editor-in-chief, Susan Blystone, had the feature article titled, Bolstering Education, Meeting the National Need for Teachers. Jennifer read the article first, and it was well written and had good points, but what caught her eye was a sidebar column on page 21. It featured a high school mathematics teacher from Bloomington High School in Bloomington, Illinois. The teacher was Brandon Thornton, now in his 9th year of teaching in Bloomington, where he also serves as the school's speech team coach. In a column that barely went over 500 words, Brandon's dedication, love, and passion for education became very apparent. He recognizes that the challenges teachers and students face are difficult, but the end result is well worth it. Brandon also recognizes there has possibly been political overreach, which has presented more challenges to education. Brandon says he is worried about the shortage of teachers, but what struck me the most was when he was quoted saying he is worried about the shortage of teachers who are passionate. So I've invited Brandon onto Anchored in Education today because I believe he is yet another educator we need to be learning from. Brandon, welcome to Anchored in Education.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'm really excited to have you too, and we'll get to, I kind of alluded a little bit into the intro how I got to you, and we've got a lot of things to learn from you today, but before we get into that, I think that we'd like to find out a little bit more about you and how you became anchored in education.
Absolutely. Okay, so well, my mom has always been around kids. At a very young age, she operated a home daycare. That was when I was 5, so I've always been surrounded by kids. That eventually turned into a preschool when she was operating 2 different centers. And so the idea of helping out with kids has kind of been ingrained in me. I didn't realize it was going to take on the form of teaching, I would say, until sophomore year of high school.
Okay.
And I had a lot of really good math teachers who I wasn't really the best in math. I was in all honors classes except math. But I had really good math teachers who made it fun and made it relevant and allowed for mistakes. And then I discovered that they all went to Illinois State University. And so I kind of figured that's exactly where I needed to go. And here we are.
Sure. And I started the podcast by giving a shout out to Illinois State because they, through their alumni journal that my wife receives is how I got connected with you. And it's interesting. You say that you're an honor student and everything in school except math. And at Bloomington High, you teach.
Yes. At Bloomington High School, I transitioned into special ed this year.
Okay.
But for the last 8 years, I was teaching math. And then I also coach speech team where I get to dip my hands in kind of English and speech writing and things like that. So over the summer, an opportunity opened up where there was a position in special ed at my building where I currently teach, same Bloomington High School. And so I took it. I had a master's degree in special ed for 3 years. I was just waiting to kind of transition into special ed.
Sure.
And that's where I am now. Unfortunately, I'm not teaching math anymore, but I am teaching English, which is something else that I had considered teaching way back when I was a sophomore in high school. It was between English and math, but I thought I would have more fun in math. And I'm having fun in English, proud to report. So
that's awesome. But
a really good transition.
8 years as a math teacher.
And 8 years as a math teacher, yeah.
I believe I also saw you're pursuing your doctorate from Illinois State?
Yes, now I'm working on my doctorate in special ed.
Oh
Um,
man, you're a
yeah,
busy guy.
I am a busy guy. I don't know why I do this to myself, but
Because
I'm still enjoying it.
we know why you do it, and we're going to find out more because you're going to talk about that.
Yes, yes.
But yeah, so we're talking about being proud of the profession today, and you mentioned it, and I also noticed in my research about you that on top of teaching, you're the coach of the school's speech team.
Hmm.
I find this fascinating because I believe public speaking is one of the most powerful tools one can possess. So, tell us a little bit more about the planning, the preparation, and the execution of the speech team.
Absolutely. So in Illinois, speech is actually something that's not required anymore to graduate high school. So, we live in a world now where kids can get through the school day without even talking. Kids are walking around
You're
with their
right.
AirPods. The first interaction they might have is when they get home, when their parents ask how was school today, because a lot of kids may eat lunch alone. They ride the bus with their music in. During passing periods, they have their earbuds in. In classrooms, we hope that they're getting regular interaction, but sometimes you can go through 50 minutes without getting called on.
Yeah.
And so when I was asked to coach speech team, I actually said no because I had no background in speech. And then I was asked again by the principal, and I said no. And then a student had asked and said, "Thank you for taking over. Without you, we won't have a team." And here we are. So this is
Yeah.
my fifth year coaching speech team, and it's kind of complicated. There are competitive acting events. There's competitive public speaking events, what you think of, and there's kind of events that are kind of bordering on debate. And
Okay.
so the typical preparation is me meeting with the kids whenever they're free to kind of help them pick out what event they want to do. Um, at the end of the day, whether it's acting or public speaking, it all borders on advocating. They're advocating for some sort of change, and whether that's through a monologue that they picked out, or through a persuasive speech that they wrote, or an informative speech that they wrote, or even one of the events you debate on a political current event. They're always advocating for some sort of change. So we work on forming that speech, and there's certain rules we have to follow because it's governed by the Illinois High School Association, which also governs all of our sports.
Okay.
And so there's things we have to abide by. But then every Saturday, they stand in front of judges who are coaches, teachers, former competitors, and they just perform all day. And then they get critiques in the form of written feedback on ways they can improve.
Wow.
So we're telling an adolescent, we're writing things that we don't like about them, and they have to read that every week and bounce back and perform and get better and better. And it does. And then at the end of the year, they have the state contest, which is the top 18 speakers in the state. Um, we hope to qualify for that, which we have the last 4 years.
Wow, that's
So
impressive.
yeah, yeah. So they work really hard. They work really hard.
Well, as I'm listening to you talk about your work with the speech team, it's a great segue because you talk about advocating for something, and
Hmm.
so that leads right into I think you would agree you're passionate about education.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
if listeners haven't figured that out yet, I believe they soon will. But you have said that you wished everyone could see how hard teaching is. And I've talked to guests before who have said that unless you're in education, you really don't have a clue.
Hmm.
What do you believe is the hardest aspect of being a teacher today?
To me, the hardest part is understanding that sometimes your job isn't to teach. And I know that sounds contradictory to like what we're supposed to be doing.
Sure.
But the reason it was so easy for me to switch from math to English was because I've always felt that I was bigger than just teaching the content. Um, like we said, advocate. Your job is to advocate for the kids with whatever they need in that moment. And oftentimes it's just someone to talk to about a breakup, or someone to bounce ideas back on substance abuse, or someone to hook them up with the local food pantry. And so to me, that's the hardest part, because we're getting pressures from counselors or parents or maybe your evaluator about grades, when really that's not the most important thing at that moment. Because
Sure.
I feel like once you provide kids with those foundational needs, then they'll do anything for you. And I kind of learned that the hard way because my first year I was all about I have to get through this lesson.
All
That
about the
way I
content.
provided them, yeah, all about the content. And I learned that once kids felt safe and happy in my classroom, their grades went up naturally.
It
So
it's an amazing and simple concept, yet often overlooked.
often overlooked. And it's easy to look in at an outside lens and say, why don't schools teach this? Why don't schools teach that? Kids are graduating not knowing this. Teach them how to budget. Teach them how to, you know, get a mortgage and things like that. And there's really not enough time. And it's not because of the content, but it's because we're just trying so hard to provide our kids with just like those soft skills to make it to function as an adult. And I only see them for 50 minutes. So
Sure.
it's so hard.
So, and
But
yeah,
it's
no,
rewarding
go
when
ahead.
they get it. It's rewarding when they come back as alumni and say, "Oh, thank you so much for always teaching me to it's okay to make mistakes because that really helped when I was doing this." So that's the most important part, I think,
Well,
and the
and
hardest part.
we may teach an all-star lesson, but
Hmm.
that's not guaranteed to be what students remember about us. It'll be about
Hmm.
the things that we didn't learn in our undergrad, and that's no diss to any institution. That's part of learning of being a teacher. And like
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
said, it came in not in your first year, but quickly it came to you. And I think that's what
Hmm.
we're trying to highlight today is that there's some great things in this profession, but if you're just going to focus on content and you're going to ignore the most important piece, which is students, that's in front of you,
Yes.
it's going to be hard.
Yes. And I see why that's happening because, we toss around this word professional. And so people think, okay, so a lawyer, they're experts in the law. That's what makes them professional. And doctors are experts in medicine. That makes them professional. And so I think people assume we need to be experts in our content area, which we are.
Sure.
However, I think the professional part comes in to play how we're able to meet the needs of 30 learners at the same time by responding with what's best for that student at that given moment, which parents don't see and critics don't see. All they see are test results and
Yes.
things like that. So,
No,
yeah.
you're hitting on some great points today. And so in the article I read, you had this quote: "There are days where the math lesson just didn't happen for everyone because I don't put math before the needs of the kids." And
Mhm.
so, I mean, you just spoke on this that's that content. That's the kids before the content. But you've also talked about the students being emotionally overloaded. So
Mhm.
first of all, I'm going to once again commend you for having this mindset because that is truly what students need. Now,
Yes.
second, are you seeing this emotional baggage become more of a focus each year?
Um, I think so, and I see it across every student. So, like in speech team, a lot of my students are involved in band, drama. They're in honors programs. They're in AP classes. They're taking dual credit at our local community college, and then I also teach. I taught co-taught for the last 8 years, and so they're in classes where they have two teachers, one special ed, one general ed, and they're working another job. They're dealing with all sorts of different things that I didn't really have to deal with. And across the spectrum of students, I see this emotional overload. Um, and you could just see how their engagement levels in the hallway, their engagement levels at lunch, and their engagement levels in the classroom. And it's gotten worse over the years. And I'm not sure why. I don't can't really pinpoint it, but I found that if I give the first couple of minutes of each class to just let kids kind of decompress,
Mhm.
then things kind of get easier. And I know like we're taught the most effective teachers are bell to bell, they have transitions, they're maximizing instructional time. But you can't do that if a kid is dealing with a conflict on social media. You need to give them time to reset. And it's the same as adults. We imagine like leaving work and you walking home and immediately people run up to you, they want to talk to you. That's
Right.
what's happening with our kids. They get 4 minutes to transition into the next, and then you have an adult telling you what you need to do right away. Otherwise, it's going to affect your grade. And so it's just it's kind of
Yeah.
intense.
Well, you're
So,
right, and it's really unreasonable to expect students to the minute the bell rings to
mhm.
be automatically everything else is put aside and I'm ready for math or I'm ready for
Yes.
history or I mean we'll get there, but like you said, all it's going to take you is what, 3 or 4 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not talking rocket science here. This is just simply giving students the opportunity to talk and to kind of not let loose, but in a way get it off their chest. So, Brandon, I'm not looking to get real political here, which I know I've got friends that are probably laughing, wondering why today is he deciding not to get political. But because that's not our focus. But you had a comment that said education is already tarnished by politicians and social media. That's not necessarily pointing towards one party or the other. It's just to me a general statement. So,
Yeah.
can we talk for a little bit on how those outside of the profession are quick to judge without having a clue as to what truly goes on inside our buildings?
Yeah. I feel like both sides of the aisle are very public with using the phrase public education is failing, and here's how we can improve it. And I think they're looking at the wrong outcomes. They're looking at test scores and they're looking at things that a majority of our students truly don't care about. And even like the kids who are valedictorians, I know plenty of valedictorians who graduate who aren't don't really retain anything they've learned,
Sure.
but they played the game because they wanted to get into a certain college. Um, and so I feel like we shouldn't seek value in those test scores if our kids don't even seek value in the test scores. And even teachers, we're evaluated on these test scores rather than the kids in front of us. You know what I mean? And so I feel like it's very easy to say, we have increased violence among youth and we have increased uh, I don't know, mental health issues among youth because public education is failing our kids.
Right.
But then there's no strategies on how we're addressing all of those things besides what I'm doing in my classroom, which doesn't put an emphasis on test scores. And
Right.
so it's kind of like, well, what do we do? Do we just stop valuing test scores? And it also sends this narrative that all kids are on this college track, which as a product of higher education, I stand behind higher education. I think it's important. But I also see that it puts this unnecessary emotional baggage on kids too, because they're taught at a very young age that if I don't go to college, I'm not going to be successful. And then they have all these systematic barriers that's preventing them from equal access to even applying for college. And so then it's all these things, and then by the time they're seniors, they grow to resent the whole college narrative. And that's what we're seeing right now. Um, we took a college visit. We took all the juniors to our local, to ICE, to Illinois State University.
Yeah.
And a lot of kids didn't want to go. They were so convinced that college wasn't for them. And I know that they didn't get that message from us. And so it makes you wonder, who are they getting that message from? So I think it comes from social media and politicians, just the rhetoric they use when describing public education, that it's failing.
Absolutely. And to even take that one step further, we could talk about the shortage of teachers, which is actually
Yeah.
that was the your article in Illinois State Alumni Magazine was part of an inset to an article that was on the teacher shortage.
Hmm.
And I've said many times that a lot of we've got some quality people that would be amazing educators and maybe even viable, and that's the direction they were going. But because of the negative talk, they're going somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see that negative talk happening even within teachers. And I'm guilty of this. Like, I'll make a joke when kids are using too much tissue. And I'll say, hey, I buy the tissue myself. Like, how to make a lot of money. So could you not? And although it's funny, kids are hearing that
Right.
across every classroom since kindergarten. So they grow up knowing, oh, teaching is a profession that I won't make a lot of money in. Which, if you look at the facts, it kind of is true. But I think we do a disservice when we only focus on money, because a lot of kids enter senior year and all they want to do, they just say, well, I want to make a lot of money.
Right.
And so then they choose these careers such as law and medicine that require a lot of education that maybe they weren't prepared for because we didn't have them on the right track. Or maybe they choose law and medicine knowing that they don't really want to work in that field. And so we have a lot of kids changing majors 3 or 4 times and wasting money. And so I think we put so much emphasis on making money is a part of growing up, when really I don't think that's true, because no matter what profession you're in, you're always going to be struggling with money. You're always going to be moving money around trying to make this bill, because the more money you make, the more things you're going to
Sure.
acquire and whatever. And I don't know, this might be limited to my personal experience, but I feel like I make enough money to make a happy living. And I am single, I don't have kids, but I feel like that is the trend among post millennials, who are going to be the ones entering professions. And so it kind of isn't true anymore that you don't make enough money. It is true when it comes to, if you want to raise a family, absolutely you need a two income, you know, household.
Sure.
But for our kids who are not even thinking about starting a family, we do them a disservice when we say, like, you won't make enough money teaching.
Right.
Because when I threw out a lot of kids don't even have a concept of salary, because their parents don't have a salary. They're working minimum wage jobs, and so anything is better than the situation that they're in now. So I try to say things like, I don't. You should be thinking about money. You should be thinking about, what are you going to do that's going to make you feel happy? Because when I come to work every day, it doesn't feel like work. It's kind of like a part of my day. Like, I'm here right now at my school.
Oh, okay.
So I'm just here waiting for some kids to come in because they're working on speech on their day off.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't feel like, I have to go to work. It's just like, it's a part of my day. And too many of us grow up thinking, we got to go to work, you got to work to live. And I don't feel that way, because I chose a career that I knew I was going to be happy in. So
That makes a world of difference.
it
And
does.
and another thing is, you have made the investment of going back to school for your master's and now again for your doctorate, which
Yeah.
can will definitely contribute to your overall lifetime earnings,
Yeah.
and it's a good investment. So, while I'm talking about Illinois State University, that's where you've been for undergrad and graduate coursework. But if you were able to go back to your undergrad program, what is one thing, or maybe two, that you would tell them must be taught to pre-service teachers?
Ooh, this is good. Okay, so no offense to Illinois State University, but this is kind of for all
Yeah.
secondary programs across the country, is we don't really do a good job of preparing our high school teachers um, on how to teach kids. And the way it works, at least in Illinois, is that K through 8, you're usually a part of the College of Education with whatever university you're from. But everything after that, you're in the department. So, for example, I graduated with the College of Arts and Sciences through the mathematics department.
Okay.
I was just certified to teach 6 through 12. And the problem with that is that I didn't have to take a lot of the child psychology classes, a lot of the teaching classes.
Oh, really?
I didn't take a single special ed class. Um, so when I got into teaching, I was taught that our job is to prepare the future scientists, the doctors. You're going to be teaching math at a rigorous level, because America is failing in math and science and technology. And then when I started teaching, that wasn't happening. And a lot of our first year teachers enter into those remedial courses, because the veteran teachers have they're the ones usually given the AP, the upper level courses. And so I entered not having tools on how to make math easy, because I was only taught how to make math challenging.
Okay.
So that was problematic, which is why I ended up going back for my master's, is because when I started co-teaching, I realized that my special ed counterpart, she was better than me at my job than I was. She's better, and it was her first year teaching too, but she was better at making those aha moments for kids. And so I thought, I have to go back. I don't know how to teach all kids. I can only teach like
Wow.
a certain group of kids. And so I learned a lot about teaching in the special ed department, which was in the College of Education. And so I would just ask that, I don't know, secondary programs work closer with the College of Ed and Department of Special Ed and curriculum instruction, to just make sure that high school educators pre-service are graduating knowing how to work with all kids, and not just kids who are good in their content area.
Yeah, what an interesting observation,
Yeah.
and one I have never thought of. But you're absolutely right that you missed out on some core content areas in college by being away from the College of Education.
Yeah. And what happens, I see it in some of my, not coworkers, but friends who graduated from ISU with me. They're not having a good time, and a lot of our conversation centers on, well, the kids can't factor, or the kids don't know quadratic formula, and they're frustrated that the kids aren't acquiring the content, and because that's all they know. They were trained that, well, my job is to provide a skill, and my kids
Mm-hmm.
aren't reaching that skill, therefore I'm ineffective. And I have a different lens because I went back to school and realized that my job was to build kids up so they could acquire a skill. And I think that's why a lot of teachers leave the first 5 years, because they feel ineffective, because the kids aren't engaged, and it's all centering in how they're prepared to teach. They're just not prepared to teach adequately, um, with the population that they're going to be facing. So
Yeah, great observation. Not just for Illinois State. This is for any institution. I hope they're
any
listening.
institution.
So, hey,
Hmm.
Brandon, before we go, about 4 years ago, I did research for my dissertation that looked at why people join the profession as teachers, what their current job satisfaction was, and then the overall willingness to encourage others to the profession. So, this is more than applicable to our conversation today. You seem
Okay.
to be extremely satisfied in the
Yeah.
profession. So, what is your willingness to encourage others to the profession? And then, second, what do you tell them when they appear skeptical?
So I always tell them to not worry about the money. Kids always ask me like, "Oh, how much do you make?" And I say, "Well, I make a difference," and then they laugh because it sounds lame and cheesy. But that really is what you want to do. You want to choose something that you're going to be proud with. Um, and to me, the reason I'm proud of education is because I get to see the product of my work every day. Um, and I know I still, don't get me wrong, it sounds like, oh, he only cares about kids and not his content. I still build lessons based off of the standards. I still check boxes, but the most important thing of that day is to make sure the kids felt supported and empowered to learn whatever skill that I was trying to get them to learn. And I think we think that kids are supposed to master something in those 50 minutes, but it's a process. Like, I'm still learning how to learn in doctoral school. So I
Yeah.
can't expect my kids to learn a skill in one day. So
Well, we don't call it scaffolding for a reason, right?
exactly, yeah.
Hey, Brandon, this has been a fantastic talk, and I thank you so much for joining us in Anchored in Education today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've learned a lot just by the questions you asked. I didn't even think
Oh,
that I thought this was the norm, but I think I'm discovering more and more that many people don't feel this way. But hopefully after listening that they can kind of reflect on why.
well, that's most definitely our hope, and I know that we learned something from you today. So thank you.
Thank you.
So you can find Brandon on Twitter by searching at BGThorn89. You can also learn more about Brandon by visiting escottengland.com and clicking on the Read More link under today's episode. And before I wrap up, don't forget to subscribe to Anchored in Education on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on. I have more years of being anchored in education than Brandon, yet I feel invigorated and refreshed to improve my craft. We've all heard about finding your why. In fact, I was scrolling through Twitter recently when I saw several educators post using the hashtag #MyWhy. But if you're wondering what this sounds like, Brandon just put a demo on for you. In education, we get so caught up in all the negative things, the pointless legislation, the more high-stakes testing, the media saying that our schools are failing, so much so that we as educators begin to believe that the negativity outweighs the positive. You know who really loses out when the negativity begins? Students. Did you notice how Brandon's response is tied back to effective teaching and learning with an emphasis on the students? That is why he is proud of the profession. That is why he is proud to be an educator. Brandon did what many of us, myself included, should do more often. He acknowledged that at times there are downsides to education. There are downsides actually in everything. It is how we choose to respond and give attention to those downsides that determines how it will impact our satisfaction and our overall demeanor. I would gladly take a building full of Brandon Thorntons. He told me this was his first podcast, and I told him that with the drive and the attitude like he has already, that it is far from his last. It is teachers like Brandon that makes me glad that at the end of the day, we are all anchored in education.